Hello, this is the Masked Memoirist with another session, another episode of Facebook Live. We're here in the Auburn Cemetery in Auburn, Kansas, and this is where several of my family members are buried. We'd like to wish everyone a happy All Saints Day, and we want to talk a little bit about maybe ghost busting and myths about cemeteries as scary places.
Yes.
This is Sherry. Sherry is my good friend, and she's helping with personal chapters and with this Facebook Live. So, Sherry, what do you have to say about cemeteries?
Well, we're here in this beautiful cemetery. I wish all of you could be here with us because it is so lovely today. I mean, you can see we're in our shirt sleeves. We don't have a jacket on. I did have to tie my hair back a little bit because we've got a breeze going today. But, cemeteries are a really peaceful place. And I had an experience recently. I was on a field trip with a group of young adults who were visiting various cemeteries where historical people had been buried. And there was one young man on the tour that was kind of hanging back a little bit. So I kind of went to talk to him and see what was up. And he said, I've never felt comfortable in cemeteries. I feel like cemeteries are a place where there's ghosts and it's scary. And I really don't know that I want to be here. And it was really fun to have that conversation with him because my experience has been really different. And my experience has been that cemeteries are a place where we can honor the past. They're a place where we can remember. And they're definitely a place where we can connect. And we know as Christians that we have the ability in later years to be able to reconnect in the hereafter with those that we have loved that have gone on before. So cemeteries, they may be in scary movies, and it may not be a place that you're comfortable going in the dead of night, especially on Halloween. But here we are, the day before Halloween, the eve of Halloween on All Saints Day, here to honor those who have lived wonderful lives and who have made a difference in our lives.
My grandmother, Junia, my grandfather, Noble, my father, Floyd, and my mother, Peggy, are all buried right behind us. And I have such precious memories of my grandmother. She would, every Memorial Day, she would cut the peonies in her yard. She would put them in a big coffee can. She'd line the coffee can with tin foil, put water in it, and we would go to the cemeteries and honor the lives of our deceased loved ones. So that ritual, I think, in our generation has kind of fallen by the wayside a lot, although I have found myself doing that. But it is so important to honor and remember those who went before us.
We have family stories like that too. My paternal grandmother would grow peonies and snowballs and irises specifically for Memorial Day, and would harvest everything that had grown by that moment, and then took this huge group of flowers out to the various cemeteries where she had ancestors buried, and they would take the whole day. They'd pack a lunch. It was like a family tradition. So I wish we could get back to that a little bit. I guess so many of us are spread out so far, and we're not necessarily living in a place where we are close to the cemeteries where our ancestors were buried. But, we can still go and on Memorial Day, reverence those who have fought in the wars and done the things that have made our country great. One of the things Ann and I were talking about today as we were preparing to come down to the cemetery was, different experiences that we've had in cemeteries. And of course, if you're like us, you've been to cemeteries on sad occasions when you've had family or friends who have passed, and maybe you're there for a graveside service or for somebody to be interred. One of the most memorable and one of the most tender experiences for me of being in a cemetery happened many years ago. I was married to my first husband, and he had been orphaned. He and his sister had been orphaned at age 6 when their parents and uncle and grandfather were killed in a tragic plane accident. And I didn't ever have the opportunity to meet his parents, of course, and so I didn't have the mother-in-law, I didn't have the father-in-law that were here, in my life. And he really wanted me to see a little bit more about his life and growing up. And so we made a trip to the Pacific Northwest. We went to Pacific Grove, in particular in California, which is right on the coast. And he took me to lots of different places that his relatives and ancestors had lived, that he remembered being in different places as a child. And we ended up at the Pacific Grove Cemetery, which is right on the coast. It's beautiful. And he remembered where his parents were buried. So we pulled up with the car and he parked, and it was something happened that he wasn't able to bring himself to get out of the car, but he pointed out where the graves of his parents were. And they were buried in what I now know is a memorial park, and a memorial park has flat stones in the cemetery so that when you go to have an experience in the cemetery, you can treat it more like a park, and not be so worried about where's the headstone and trying to walk in between the headstones, but that you can just go and be. And so I found those two gravestones that were flat in the earth, and Father was on one side, his mother was on the other, and I had brought a rose with me in their honor. And as I knelt on the ground to place that rose between the two headstones, something very special happened. And as I knelt there, all of a sudden I felt this arm come around me and around my shoulder. And then I felt another arm come the other way around my other shoulder. And I knew that his parents were there. And I knew that in that moment that they had accepted me into the family, and that they appreciated the fact that I was there to try to honor them. And those are the kinds of experiences that have endeared me to cemeteries. And there are many more I could share, but that was the one that I just felt like I wanted to share today because we do live beyond this life. And so if we can remember that cemeteries are the places of where the mortal remains are of those that we've loved, we can feel more comfortable about coming and knowing that, maybe they're watching, maybe they're hearing, maybe they're here with us, and maybe sometimes we can even sense that or feel that.
Good point, Sherry. One thing I would add is that there is a new paradigm these days of cemeteries as places to celebrate their lives. Just as the new paradigm for funeral homes is becoming a place for a gathering, a place for a community to come together and celebrate a life, have a good meal. And I believe the paradigm started shifting in Europe and has made its way over here. I was talking to a funeral director a couple of years ago, and he mentioned that this was the new thing because so many people are being cremated, and there just isn't a place to go, like a cemetery, where the family can get together and absolutely celebrate the life that was lived. And it's a really encouraging thing. Instead of thinking about or planning a funeral, plan a celebration of life, which a lot of them are starting to call that now.
Yeah. I'm remarried now, and my new husband has 3 children from his wife, who has passed away some years ago, and one of my sons is currently a funeral director for Lindquist Mortuary in Utah. His name is Chris Patrick. And today I called Chris and I said, son, can you help me understand what's happening in the funeral industry and in the cemetery industry with regard to connection? Is the United States following suit with what Anne is sharing with me about Europe and how they're connecting in cemeteries? And he said, oh, Mom, Absolutely. And he told me about how before I joined the family, he had worked for a funeral home on the West Coast where they actually had a community room in the basement and a catering service that operated out of that mortuary, and they would hold celebrations there and weddings and different anniversary events and things for the living as well as for the memory of those who had passed. And he said, in fact, he said during COVID, it's been really interesting. He, being a funeral director, he's often in cemeteries, of course, and he said that he was recently in a cemetery conducting a graveside service, and there was nearby a group of family members of someone who was interred in the cemetery, and they had gathered in honor of their loved one who had passed and were celebrating the birthday of that person with ice cream cones in the cemetery. And you think about that when we come together for funerals. What do? We share the stories of what
Absolutely.
we remember about our beloved members of our family and friends,
and the pictures,
yes, and we laugh and we come away uplifted because of what we've remembered. And so if we can think about cemeteries as a place of not just coming together and connecting, but a place of remembering things that maybe we haven't thought about in a long time. And
I've seen movies where people are having a picnic on the grave of a loved one. So they're just places to connect, as Sherry has already said.
Yeah. You were going to tell us a story about visiting your father's.
Yes, as a young adult, or in my middle age, I was not comfortable coming to cemeteries. It wasn't that I felt that evil lurked in the shadows or that there were ghosts surrounding me. It was just I wasn't that familiar with them. I hadn't had that many brushes with death. I hadn't buried very many loved ones at all, maybe none. And so one day I decided to come to this area and try to find my deceased father's grave. He died when I was 4. And at first I could not find it. I frantically phoned my mother and asked her where it was located. And she finally connected us to the stone, and I should have been able to spot it immediately because it has a dump truck on it. My father hauled ag lime, for farmers in the area. So my mother had a dump truck put on the gravestone. And so my second husband and I stood quietly at the tombstone for a while, and I just was so uncomfortable. I didn't know what to do. I just wasn't used to being in this environment. So he said, don't sweat it. Just stand here quietly, say the Lord's Prayer, and see what happens. So that is exactly what I did. And just as I finished the last words of that prayer, a cooling breeze came up, and my husband smiled and said, "See, he's here. He loves you. He wants you to know that he is fine." So cemeteries, in that moment for me, it was a reassuring place, a place of love.
Yeah. So we want to leave you with a challenge today. Tomorrow is going to be Halloween with trick-or-treating and all those kinds of things, and honoring goblins and skeletons and all those kinds of things. But I hope that as you enter this evening and tomorrow and this weekend, that maybe some of what we've shared today will come back into your mind. And if you have a cemetery nearby that has some of your family members that are there, you might consider going and paying a visit and just seeing what memories might come up for you and seeing what feelings might come up for you. And if you don't have a cemetery where you have ancestors nearby, you might consider just taking a walk in your local cemetery or your local memorial park and just enjoy the beauty of the trees and the flowers that might be there and the different monuments and statuary and watch for that breeze. You might just feel it like Ann did.
Thank you for joining us, And we will see you next time. We wish all of you a happy All Saints Day and tomorrow a happy All Souls Day. Thank you.
Thank you.